Alright. Hello again, everybody. Diamond Sutra, Part 1. Here we go. What I'm going to do today is talk through background, context, history, what it is we're doing here, and then I'm actually only going to talk through the first 2 or 3 sections of this sutra. So it's not much that we're actually going to be talking through, but it is really, really important. Not much, and there is an awful lot in that not much. So this is the Vajracchedika Prajna Paramita Sutra, is what this is formally titled, which loosely translates as the Diamond Cutter Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. It is one of a decent-sized body of sutras, which includes the Heart Sutra, which I learned on Sunday. That's one of the Prajna Paramita Sutras. It's a body of literature that emerged from about 1 BCE through about 6 or 7 CE. So it emerged over several hundred years. And there's maybe half a dozen or 8 core sutras in there, and then a whole bunch of more esoteric sutras around the edges of that. It's a very large body of literature. It's foundational to the broad branch of Buddhism, which is commonly called Mahayana Buddhism. The Vajracchedika Sutra is important across Asia and Zen and Chan. It's also important as we go up into Tibetan Buddhism. So it's a sutra with broad impact. In terms of origin, a lot of people like to say that the Pali Canon emerged first, 500 years BCE. There's this guy showed up and he taught, and we had all the Pali texts come out. And then sometimes several hundred years later, a bunch of people came up with a new body of teachings which built on the older ones, but is superior to them, and that became Prajna Paramita. There are people who like to say, well, all of these were magical texts they're not magical. These were all actually taught by the Buddha 500 BCE, and then hidden away until people were ready, and then they were brought out when people were ready. Well, I mean, the truth is, nothing was written down until about when we first started seeing these things anyway. So nobody knows. And when we first saw evidence of these teachings emerging in writing, they were all enmeshed. So I think getting caught in stories of origin and what came first gets us into a tangled mess, which then just becomes a wasp's nest. But it also misses the core point. And the core point is not to hold preferences of any of this. There's the core body of Buddhist teachings that points directly at this truth. And this clearly points directly at that truth. We'll talk about that in a minute. Prajna, let's just pass the title. So, Vajracchedika, Diamond Cutter, which is the diamond body that cuts through illusion. So it's called the Diamond Sutra, which I don't think in English, that's what it's commonly called in English. I don't think that does it justice. We get short titles. It's like the Lotus Sutra. That doesn't do that particular sutra justice either. Diamond Cutter is much closer to the truth, because this is a tool that cuts through illusions. It's designed to cut through the stories we tell ourselves and cut through to truth. Cut through to help truth emerge and become experience. Prajna Paramita, perfection of wisdom, the highest wisdom, perhaps. I heard a really lovely sermon, for want of a better word, by a Theravadan monastic about Prajna Paramita. And he was drawing on a sutta out of the Pali Canon. I think it was on the numerical discourse, out of the numerical discourses. But it was a sutra that, as he stepped through it, it was beautifully done. He talked through the Brahma Viharas, which are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, as wisdom. And then the person came back and said to Buddha, yes, that's good, but what is prajna? What is the highest form of wisdom? The Buddha just said, it's loving kindness. just wanting people to be happy. Sounds so simple, but it's actually, it is very, very simple, but it can be difficult, but it's very simple. So this prajna paramita is something we can tend to set aside, but it's really not to be set aside, because it is the same, it's the basic truth that all there is love, as John Lennon used to say, right? All there is love. And there's a sense in this of death and rebirth, and this shows up throughout religious traditions. And I'm getting, if you go, the Gospel of Mark is a great example. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus performs a whole bunch of miracles, and these miracles are around helping the deaf hear, the blind see, and raising the dead. He raises Lazarus from the dead. I think there are 3 miracles where he raises people from the dead. I mean, maybe these are miracles, but this is a miracle. we are miracle. Life is miracle. The whole thing is miracle. So miracle in that language is just something we don't understand. But in that teaching, getting the deaf to hear and the blind to see is helping people wake up to the truth. That's what we're all doing. That's what this is about. It's about helping us wake up to the truth. And raising people from the dead, it's the same. We had a bunch of people a couple of months ago here to receive the precepts, and everybody received a Dharma name. When you take the Shahada in Islam, you come up to the front, you communicate with the Imam, and you profess there's only one God but God, and Muhammad is his servant, his prophet, and you receive a new name. It's a death and rebirth. Receiving a new name on the precepts is the same symbolism. It's a death and a rebirth into something new. This raising the dead is about this kind of rebirth. So I'm spending time on this. It sounds really simple and almost trite, but it is really, really important. It's what this is about. It's about killing the old self, the ego. There's we're going to spend, as I've told you what we're doing today. The other 5 sessions, if we did 2 a week, we would spend a very long time on this. So there are some more broad themes that recur throughout this that I will be picking up on picking up on later. One of them is, and we used it several times here, it came up, personality, an ego, a personality, a being and a life. There is none. We kill it. That's what we're getting rid of in order to wake up to truth, because we are truth, we just don't know it. So this Vajracchedika is cutting through, killing the old, killing the ego, helping us wake up to this truth. There's a lot of people will tell you what the Diamond Sutra is about. One of my very favorite translators, Red Pine, his commentary on the Diamond Sutra, he says it is about bodies. There's the Trikaya, the 3 bodies of Buddha, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. It's like the hypostases, the 3 bodies in Christianity. And there's 32 sections in this. And when you look at the body of Buddha, it's got 32. I forget what it is, but there's can Buddha be recognized by the 32 parts of his body? No. That's why we call it the 32 parts. 32 sections. It's a body. No. It's not about bodies. That's a useful way of looking at it, perhaps. We can learn stuff out of it when we look at it that way. But to say it's about bodies is to miss the point. It is not about emptiness either. For it to be about something, it's a treatise, it's a sermon, it's a philosophical text. It's not about anything. It's a textbook. Just like the Bhagavad Gita is a textbook. It's a manual. It's textbook's probably wrong. It's a manual. It's a user manual for this. The Bhagavad Gita is a manual for teaching us how to use this system in a particular way to wake up. The Diamond Sutra is exactly the same. It is a manual. And this incredibly wonderful commentary, which is far my favorite translation and commentary on this manual, itself is a manual. It's a manual on how to use a manual, right? And you can find some really, really interesting texts that have really thoughtful ways of looking at it, and they can help you in approaching it. But it's really to be approached as a manual. And we'll come back to talk about I want to hear everybody's experience of chanting and talk about chanting. That's one of the things I want to come back to when we get further in, when we get down to the group discussion part of this. But chanting is really, really an important way of dealing with this. I have not chanted this as much as I would like, but I have done a lot of chanting of this over the last 2 or 3 months. And I have found it really profound. Somewhere in the early part of this book, he talks about his time as a teenager. I think he was a teenager. He may have been younger than that, actually. When he came across the Diamond Sutra, and he started chanting it. And he used to do it secretly, and he didn't have one of those things he would bang because he was afraid of waking everybody up, and he didn't want people to be aware of it. But he used to chant it. And I understand that the Chinese language is much more compact. So, yeah, at the speed we were doing this, seriously, it's right at 35 minutes at that speed. At this speed, it's right at 35 minutes to do the whole thing. But in Chinese, I understand it may be half as long. It's much shorter, but it's still a meaningful chunk of chanting. So he did that regularly. And then one day when he was chanting, the bottom dropped out. He had this profound awakening experience. That's what happens when you take on chanting and you just chant. The body takes over. There is a lot of mind in the body is mind, I can tell you that. The body is mind. We have a very limited understanding of mind. We scratch the surface of mind with what we think of as mind. The body is mind, and the whole thing is a much deeper mind. So when we chant, mind gets deeply involved in the chanting, and that becomes available. Yeah, so it's an instruction manual, and it's an instruction manual most particularly in the words that he uses here, and I think it's a really good way of looking at it, in how to not dwell. And we'll get into that as we walk through the sutra, but that's what it's about. It's not about not dwelling, but it's a manual that shows us how to do that. And it shows us how to not do it and how to do it, right? So let's start at the beginning. Thus have I heard. Thus have I heard. So sutras in the Buddhist tradition generally start, thus have I heard. There's an I showing up in here, which, there's a perspective. But that perspective is standing forward and saying, not this is the truth, but this is what I heard. There's an element of modesty and humility in that. And then at one time, there's also an acknowledgement that within and from that frame of reference, there is a particular time. So there's a time and a place here. The Buddha was sojourning in the kingdom of Shravasti, staying at Anathapindika's park in the grove of Jeta. There's a story about how that came to be, but that was a very special place for the Buddhist community back at that time, and it was donated, and there's a nice story about how that happened, with an assembly of 1,250 bhikshus. The 1250, the origin of the Sangha, there were all these other little Sanghas out there, Sangha-ets out there, and this person had 50, and this person had 100, and this person had 250 students, and whatever. And over time they kind of coalesced and recognized, their teacher didn't quite, the teacher recognized they didn't quite get it, but Buddha did, so they all came together. So there's another origin story for why that's a magical number that represents this coming together. So here's where we really get going. As it was time to eat, the world-honored one put on his robe, picked up his bowl, and made his way into the great city of Shravasti, where he begged for his food from door to door. This done, he returned to his retreat, took his meal, and when he had finished, he put away his robe and bowl, washed his feet, arranged his seat, and sat down. Sounds so simple. You will hear in a number of different places that is the whole sutra. And in an important way, it really is. But that's really easy to say. Why do people say that? It will come out in the next section as we talk about it. Some of the what I'm about to say will flesh out in section 2 as we go through section 2. But the Buddha, he was in samadhi 24/7 by 365. He was in this state of complete absorption where he was fully aware, where he was fully concentrated. The word, what am I looking for a word here? Immaculate. Immaculate is a word that's used in in a number of the Central and Southern American shamanic traditions, and it's got this same valence. It's like people who are immaculate, people who are in samadhi, they don't fidget. There is no wasted effort. There's just complete concentration on what's at hand, complete immersion in what's at hand. Total awareness, total concentration, complete insight into what it really is. That's what Buddha means. That's what was there, 24/7 by 365. So it wasn't some dude feeling hungry, daydreaming a little bit, noticing the birds and thinking about where that bird came from as he wanders into town. No, it's absolute concentration. This is all effort, all attention is on this gathering, going into town, begging for food, probably eye contact when begging for food, and total connection with the person as they were begging for food, returning, the act of eating. We say our little gatha, we sit down and we eat and our mind wanders off and we think this is nice and oh, I like the taste of that, I wonder if there's more. None of that, just total concentration. So that's what this opening paragraph is intended to present. And it starts very differently, by the way, from pretty much any other sutra you'll find in the Mahayana tradition, which are all, there's the beam of light shot out from between his eyebrows and the world's all rocked and palaces emerged and people came floating in on little puffy clouds and it's all wonderful stuff. Petals come raining down, and there are metaphors and meanings in all of those things. This doesn't start like this. This is that very simple, very basic story that represents this living samadhi. Now, in the midst of the assembly was the elder Subhuti. Subhuti is one of, in the Pali Canon, he was one of the core disciples of Buddha. Variously, he is foremost in his discourses on emptiness, foremost in those leaving desires, foremost in those worthy of gifts of all things, and in the Journey to the West, which is one of the Chinese classic texts. It's a novel. It's a very early novel. I think it's 17th century, but it's a very early novel in China. It's kind of an epic. It's like 1,500 pages when translated into English. Subhuti shows up in there, and you've got these people go traipsing off trying to find sutras, and Subhuti is one of these people who he teaches them. So he's recognized as being a wise man. And so our understanding of Subhuti in the Chinese tradition is limited because we see these little excerpts coming to us in these sutras where a lot of the time he's set up as a dolt. In that tradition, he is widely recognized as being the teacher in this Journey to the West, which is this classic text where these people go off to find the great sutras. So Subhuti was in this assembly. Forthwith he arose from his seat, bared his right shoulder, knelt upon his right knee, and with palms joined respectfully addressed the Buddha. So there's a question. the question is about to come out, and we'll really talk about the question and then the Buddha's response. What is going on with the question? Whenever we read something like this, an important place to pause is to reflect on the question. We do this on Thursday evenings when we're talking about koans. You get two people, a student and a master a lot of the time, and the student will ask the master a question. This is a life and death question in that context. The student, in the context of a koan, it's absolutely a life and death question. This is the most important thing in their life. They've sacrificed everything, they've given up everything they own, all their friends, all their family, all their culture, and they've gone to live in this God-forsaken monastery, in this God-forsaken place on the top of some God-forsaken hill. And here they are. And they're here for a reason. So this question concentrates all of their effort, all of what matters to them. And he's either doing it for himself, or he's doing it because he can feel the community of monastics, the other 1,249 bhikshus. He can feel that this is something they want to know about. So as a bodhisattva, he's stepping forward and asking on their behalf. But either way, this is a really important point. It's not just a lazy question. This is something that really matters. Most rare world-honored one. The Tathagata is skillfully mindful, perfectly instructing and interesting the bodhisattvas. World-honored one. When virtuous men and virtuous women initiate the mind of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, how should their minds dwell? How should their minds be pacified? Skillfully mindful. Well, that's what he was showing. The whole of that first section was about living a life that is skillfully mindful. That's what Buddha was showing. If we read that first paragraph again and again, think how we go about getting our food. Is it as focused and concentrated? Almost certainly not. The Buddha is skillfully mindful, perfectly instructing and entrusting the bodhisattvas. Entrusting is a very deep word. We often hold it very lightly in our culture, but if you think about entrusting, it's putting complete trust in somebody. Lisa entrusted me with the Dharma when I received transmission. It's everything. It's the most important thing she had, and she entrusted me with it. Entrusting is a really deep word. It's a really meaningful, powerful word. Perfectly instructing and entrusting the bodhisattvas. Bodhisattva is one who works to improve themselves, works to become a better human being, to become a more compassionate human being, to become more fully alive, to wake up to truth. And they do this in order and only in order to be able to help others. There is no self-centeredness in that at all. There's no self-interest in there. There's no ego, personality, being or life there. There is just that activity in order to help others. So Buddha is perfectly instructing, is offering perfect instructions to people, including Subhuti, whose life direction is precisely that, and he is fully entrusting them. In that situation, how should their minds dwell? How should their minds be pacified? Subhuti as a bodhisattva is asking that question. What do I do, boss? How do I do this? The Buddha spoke. Excellent, excellent, Subhuti. It is as you say. The Tathagata is skillfully mindful, perfectly instructing and entrusting the bodhisattva. Excuse me, where am I? I just skipped. Yeah, that's right. Perfectly instructing and entrusting the bodhisattvas. Now listen well to what I say. Virtuous men and virtuous women who initiate the mind of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, which is supreme perfect enlightenment is how that translates, should thus dwell and pacify their minds. What Master Nanhui Chin does here, I've not seen in any other commentary on this sutra. But every other commentary I've seen on this sutra has been written by somebody who is very erudite, but who is fundamentally a translator or an academic. I suspect this is the only enlightened master whose commentary I have read. What he does here, it has to be right. How could it be otherwise? How should their minds be pacified? Stop! He sits. Subhuti, the answer was in your question. Skillfully mindful. The Buddha is skillfully mindful. So he demonstrates it. Their minds should dwell thus. It's like, I don't know where this came from. Student comes in with the same life or death kind of question. Teacher kind of turns it, the master kind of turns it around a little bit and puts the question back to them a little bit different way. That person soaks it in, and as they start to speak, the master does that, puts his hand over the mouth. There's that moment when the question is being asked and there's some sort of formulation of intent out of the question. That's the magical moment. That's why every week we say the Bodhisattva vows. Because the act of saying the vow is to live as a Bodhisattva. To say that vow with absolute sincerity is to be a Bodhisattva. When you put a ring on somebody's finger and you look them in the eye and you say, with this ring I thee wed, your whole being is with that act. So how should the mind dwell, how should the mind be pacified, is precisely in that intent of the question, in the question itself. And in the answer that he framed within the question. Be skillfully mindful. And then Subhuti says, doesn't get it, does he? There's a pause. He's waiting. He thinks Buddha's formulating his answer. He missed that he's already received the answer. I assure you, world-honoured one, we joyfully await your answer. Ah. So I've got to do the other 30 sections of this now? Okay, here we go. This to me is a hugely important point. This is the turning point of the whole thing. This is where the sutra could have ended here. But for it to be a manual, it really can't end here. We've got to go, okay, so that's the answer. It's not the answer, that's what you do. Now we've got to get down into the details of how you do it. So let's give Subhuti credit. Let's say maybe he did get it. Maybe he did get it. But for the sake of the other 1,249 bhikshus who were present, he said, got it, boss. Okay, now give us a little more. There's a bunch of us here who needs a little more help in that. Give us a little more work to do here. The Buddha then said, Subhuti, all the bodhisattvas and mahasattvas should quell their minds in this way. All kinds of being, whether egg-born, womb-born, moisture-born, or transformation-born, they're at this time, and you can see why this would be the case, beings were seen as emerging from one of those places. Eggs, lots of animals, alligators, reptiles and birds are eggs, mammals are wombs, moisture-born, insects are moisture-born. Eggs are so small people don't see the eggs, they just see them emerging out of moisture. And then the only other form of birth that's seen is transformation. There is something that becomes something else. There's something in which an egg is laid that spontaneously is eaten and becomes the creature. So these are the four forms of coming into being. Having form or not having form, we find ourselves in this culture and this time trapped in a world of form. Hate to tell you folks, that isn't the universe. Energy is not form. Energy can become form, but of its nature it's not form. E equals mc squared, right? So you can make matter out of energy. It's fluid, but the experience of the canon and the experience of many folks, including myself, is that there is existence that is not form. There are beings that are not form. And this is talked about a lot in all these various sutras. So there's a suspend disbelief. Either know that or just suspend disbelief and allow that could be the case. Having thought or not having thought, through my reaching nirvana are saved. This is a point of great mystery, and it's repeated again and again. When Buddha wakes up, when somebody wakes up, everybody wakes up. And it is the truth. And yet we've all got to do it. It's one of those where it's not binary. Through my reaching nirvana are saved. Yet when immeasurable, innumerable and unlimited numbers of beings have been liberated, verily no beings have been liberated. This is getting to the thing that repeats and repeats throughout this, which is something happens but that no thing. This something is but no thing. Something is but no thing. And this goes right back to that basic point of not dwelling. Not dwelling. When we dwell on something, we make it a something. If we don't dwell on it, it's not a thing. We make things by dwelling. Things are just artifacts that arise when dwelling arises. If there's no dwelling, there are no artifacts. It's a totally different way of being. Not dwelling. This is the death and rebirth. The dwelling dies and this not dwelling arises. It's totally different. And it's not, there's a Natalie, there's a Clay, there's a Charles, there's a Dick, but they're not things. Without dwelling, there's not a thingness there in the same way. So there's nobody to be liberated. There really is nobody to be liberated. And yet there's suffering that has to be dealt with. If a bodhisattva retains the notion of an ego, a personality, a being and a life, he is not a true bodhisattva. This is part of that same old story. Well, there's going to be a lot more of this as we get further. We come back again and again and again to these ideas. By returning to them, we come at them from different directions. We see them from different perspectives. So the repetition is powerful. The different perspectives are powerful. The chanting is powerful because it gets it to sink down deep into our bodies, and then it just becomes something that's there, something that arises when we're not even aware it's arising in us. So it becomes part of how we are in the world. So using this sutra as the manual it is, helps this become our reality. So I'm going to stop there, and we'll pick up that whole theme around personality, being, life, etc. next week. The core points I wanted to get to really end with that pause of how should their minds dwell, how should their minds be pacified, and just that pause, that silence, because that is the answer right there. And we're now starting to get into the gloss, the commentary on it. So I will end my monologue, if you like, my commentary there, and invite comments and questions and thoughts. Before we get into specifics, your comments on what I've just gone through, I would be very interested to hear your experience of chanting. I had a particular intent there, and I wanted you to be able to experience immersion in that rapid and fairly intense chanting. Feel yourself embodying that, letting it's happened long enough that it sinks down and it becomes fairly automatic, and you're just in it, and then to transition directly from that into the stillness of meditation. So, any thoughts or comments on how that experience was for you before we move on to the questions, comments, thoughts on the sutra itself? Sally.
Um, yeah, it was really interesting. I've never chanted that long before. Um, and it was hard. I mean, I couldn't, I have to admit, I lost my place several times and all that. But um, the chanting itself, it was. I'm glad we're going to keep doing it, but
Good.
it really made my experience of sitting meditation. It was a very different texture to
Yeah.
it. Um, that because normally, I mean, in our Sunday service, we sit. You've been driving, driving, driving. We chant a little bit the morning chants, but then we just sit and then we chant the Heart Sutra after. But so doing it before was very different. It just felt different in my body,
Yes. Good.
very almost like kept a thin layer of almost protection or
Yeah.
something. So just thank you for that experience. It was great, and to share it with everybody here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Any other thoughts or comments on that? Okay.
Um, yeah, it's the act of the vibration in your throat. It's doing something. It reminds me of the fourth Bodhisattva vow. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it.
Right.
It's a very body-centered. I don't want to call it a feeling. Um, my wife Pam is a yoga teacher, and she has taken me to several yoga workshops given by Eric Schiffman. He's kind of a nationally well-known yoga teacher, and he had mentioned the syllable Aum,
Yes.
and it starts with an extremely low frequency.
Goes all the way up.
Aum, and it comes up through the chakras,
Yep.
and the chanting to me seems to be it's kind of zeroing in on
Yeah.
this Aum syllable, and it does something to you. And I remember being at several workshops where Eric would have us go through this several times, and it's I wouldn't say saying Aum is a chant. Well, actually, I guess it
It is.
probably is a form of chanting, but I recall that it really has and you can feel it not just in you, but the whole room. Everybody feels that, and it's inexplicable. You can't really. It's it's embodied.
So you got some of that today, I'm hoping.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes, I
Good.
did. I did.
Good. Well, that's what I was hoping would happen. So, anybody else want to say something, or should we move on? Because that's
I was,
well, Natalie and then Charles.
while we were doing it a few times, I was thinking that we are not speaking in a manner that is clear enough, and Clay isn't able to follow what we're saying, and it might give him like a mixed, just not being able to follow, because like you're saying something and I'm trying to
Yeah, I know.
mutter something, but like missing some words, and you're sometimes like skipping words. I don't know. I just felt like Clay was not gonna be able to follow and like hear distinctly what we were saying. Like we were not singing, in unison together. So
Before we go to Charles, do you have any quick response to that, Claire? Since we named.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm in alignment with Ken's perspective. He pretty much said everything I wanted to. I've
Okay.
told you about the pranayama practice I do, and how, when people do it all together, there's kind of that shared vibration.
Yeah.
So I think it's pretty useful. I know that since we're chanting something that's so long, and it's not repeated, right? It's not something as simple as Om, that you hear it once and you got it, right? So I tried to contribute my own voice to it, and I think I was able to tap into the shared experience as well, as best I can.
Thank you for your concern on that one, Natalie, because it's something I'm very sensitive to as well. Charles. You're on mute, Charles. Charles, you're on mute. You've got to get down and push the button on the bottom left. There you go, you got it.
Okay. I wanted to chime in with what Sally had been saying. I was not accustomed to such a long period of chant until just now. My favorite piece of Buddhist teaching is the Heart Sutra, the Prajnaparamita Sutra. And it's fairly short, fairly brief. And it ends with this, but as you all know, with this gate gate prada gate. And that's it. You move on. But to actually dwell in the teaching for an extended period of time was kind of new for me, and it was very, very helpful and very beneficial.
Good, thank you.
Thank
Dick, and then Anand.
I was just reminded. I listened to a lot of Gregorian chant, and I was sort of reminded how, listening is not participating, and the experience of participating is very different than the experience of listening.
Yeah.
That's all I had to say.
Great, thank you. Anand?
Yeah, thank you, Garrett. Yeah, I was actually a little bit struggling when chanting because I'm used to the chantings in Sanskrit that goes very well with me, but maybe because the English, the chanting, especially as everyone is seeing, this is a long chant, and the words. So that is something I'm trying to adapt, I guess. But I want to hear from these, traditions. What is the main reason they do this in a chanting way? I see some, way of connecting to this while versus reading this same thing as a chanting. I see a different way of connecting to the Diamond Sutra, and also a respect to that, and be part of it. I think becoming unison with that. That's how I see. But I just want to know what is the main other reasons or other, why they do chanting.
I'm going to summarize what we've talked about, which I think really goes straight to the answer to the question that you're saying. This is what it's about. I'm going to summarize this with a koan that I don't remember where it came from. This may or may not be a koan. It's a Zen story anyway. The question is, do you whip the cart or do you whip the horse? If you want to go forward. And, well, you whip the horse, of course. But the horse is the mind and the cart is the body. And actually in Zen, you whip the cart. Because the cart is mind. I said that before, and we'll say that a lot more before this sort of series of talks is over. The cart is mind. The body is mind. And what we think of as our mind is this veneer that floats on top of it, that isn't what we really think it is, and is capable of the most extraordinary self-deceit and illusion, and it's just kind of crazy once we start seeing through this. So chanting is a way of whipping the body. The body cannot lie. It's a way of moving our practice into the body. And the consequences, Ken and Sally both articulated in different ways, but those two articulations, the protective skin and the resonances that Ken was talking about, are really lovely ways of looking at that. Anyway, thank you for that. That was very helpful. It was very helpful to hear how it landed on you all. And it is encouraging in that it means we'll do this again next time, and I may actually stretch it a little bit next time and do a little bit more of it. So that's good. All right, so back to the text itself. I talked dominantly about the first two sections. I got into the third one some, but I talked dominantly about the first two sections and then some of the background and context. Thoughts, questions, comments on the text itself and on my words on the text. Anand and then Natalie.
Yeah, I think it's very well you explained on even the question. That is something really struck me. Actually, looking at the question itself, right? That is
Right.
that's great way of understanding or try to understand this. The other thing is it's more of a understanding about right way of understanding, I guess. The dwelling, when you say dwelling, is same as the attachment, right? So when we say
Yeah.
that's how I'm seeing that. But dwelling is something like you have this fire and fuel thing,
Yes.
right? So it is when your dwelling means you're attaching, right? So and that's I just wanted to see if that is the right way to understand.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes expounding on that. But yes, I agree with what you said, Anand. So for those who aren't familiar with it, the analogy that Anand used about fire and fuel, in Pali there's a word upadana, which means fuel, and it also means the attachment to the fuel. And we are the four elements. We are air, fire, water, and earth. That's, and what we think of, that's all nonsense. We're just, go to the periodic table and the 120 elements, however many we've got now. Well, that's all form. It's not the rest of the stuff. That's limited. We're talking about this in a different way. So with those elements, and one of those elements is fire. That's the vibrant life element. And the idea is nirvana is putting out the fire, but putting out the fire, you can't put out an element. It's just, it's beyond putting out. What that actually means, it's beyond extinction. What it means is releasing the fire from the fuel. So nirvana is this release. The fire is just, you can't find it anymore. It's out there. It's just been released from the fuel. So that's the analogy Anand was using. And the word attach, there are levels of intensity of attachment. Even just touching is kind of an attachment. In another one of my favorite suttas, which you've all heard me use many times, is where Buddha says, so if the sun comes in through the window, where does it land? The far wall. No far wall, where does it land? On the ground. If there's no ground, where does it land? On the water. If there's no water, where does it land? It does not land. That act of the light landing is precisely the attachment we're talking about. Any kind of touching, any kind of alighting, any kind of landing is a dwelling. Any kind of touching. Thank you, Anna. And then Natalie, you had something.
Yes. When I was reading it, I was thinking about the importance of the first section, and in kind of like older texts in different cultures, there is a sort of a key how to understand the whole
Yes.
text usually, and that's one of the keys. And I'm glad you mentioned about the skillful mindfulness, but for me the key was going a different direction.
Okay.
And I'm sure that both are helping each other. So the whole point of that sutta, as far as you brought these different sections, is the understanding that you shouldn't get attached to the idea of self, and to the experience of self. So there is no self, there is nothing to be touched, nothing to dwell on, nothing to be attached to. And so why is Buddha here presented in a way that is so extremely humble? From different historical, I guess, evidence or anecdotes about the life of the Buddha, especially in the Jeta Grove, we know that his cousin Anand was also his servant.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, you know, bringing him meals. He was like doing all sorts of things, preparing the cushions for Buddha to sit. But here we don't see Anand. We see Buddha going out to beg for his own food. He's putting his own cushion for himself before he sits, putting his robe and bowl away, which is exactly what Anand, like all of these things were what Anand was actually doing to the historical Buddha, as far as, you know, other texts reveal. So why all of a sudden, exactly here in this sutta about the extinction of self, we have this where the, you know, I wouldn't say like the caste system, but like the hierarchy of Buddha having somebody who is his servant. Why that? I mean, this is, you know, the value of the self. We value the selfhood of the Buddha more and the selfhood of his servant and cousin Anand less. But here that's completely abolished, and he's just like a completely humble person like any other monk. He's going out and doing like all these physical things for himself. So I think that keys the audience to think about when you are going to think that you yourself, you know, should be dwelling or should, you know, take the path with the steps of not dwelling on your own personal self. This is what Buddha also did, but also don't make the mistake to dwell on the Buddha self, like to impose a selfhood on the Buddha himself. So there's like a double, you know, I guess, meaning. Don't develop your own personal self, and don't develop the idea of self in others, including, you know, others that you think are enlightened, not just the Buddha, but like any other person.
That's a really helpful observation. Thank you, Nella. It really is. And you're right. That's definitely the historic roles that we saw. So it's very helpful. Thank you. One thing I will play with a little bit there is the very first place this goes is not expressly no self, no personality, no being, and no life. It's not dwelling. So if you, it's we've not even created the label of something to dwell on, or created the label to talk about what that dwelling looks like, which is this self thing we're talking about. Self is a word. It's another layer of getting stuck if we're not careful. So it's just not dwelling. But I agree. What you said was absolutely on point. I thank you. It's very helpful. Anyone else? So I can't believe that what I said was that clear. There must be at least some questions. And if it was just horribly worse than I thought and made no sense at all, and you all can't wait to get out of here, then please just voice that instead, so at least I know and I don't do it again.
Well, I have a question for you.
Please.
So when you were explaining the importance, I guess, of the question,
Yes.
I think it would be helpful for you to explain also what Tathagata means and
Yeah.
what Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi means, so
Thank
that
you.
we can fully understand the question.
There is a definition of Tathagata a little later, which
Well,
so I'm being a little. I was going to go there, but I don't need to go there. I can get there. So Tathagata translates loosely as it's one of those wonderful Pali words. And forgive me, this is going to butcher it, but it'll be close enough. So unless I'm horribly wrong, just give me a few liberties here. So crudely, it's something. The two words with vowel endings. So it's going to be something like tata and agata, and tatu and agata. And the tata and tatu mean different things. When you conflate them, you lose that distinction between the words. So it can mean either, and the Satipatthana Sutta can mean the same thing. It's the four foundations of mindfulness, or the four establishings as a gerund, which are different things. They point in roughly the same direction, but they mean different things. So it's one of the very clever things that is done in a lot of these sutras. Tathagata can mean either thus come or thus gone. Then you have to ask, what comes, what goes? What is thus? Suchness is used here. Suchness is just things as it is. So there's nobody there. There's this coming and going for teaching purposes, for expedient means, but it's thus come and thus gone. It's not, this is what he is, it's this comes and then it goes.
Is
And
that
this-
a reference to Buddha?
This is how Buddha described himself.
Okay.
If you read the sutras,
Okay.
Buddha does not talk of himself as Buddha. He talks of himself as Tathagata. Because from that side, from the side that shows up, there is nobody there. There's just this come and that's gone. What happens later in this, he says, not whence to go, nor whither to come from. That is Tathagata. Which is even, there's not even a place for the Tathagata to come from or to go to. So the Tathagata is a way of describing what we see as Buddha as just total non-dwelling. It's like an embodiment of non-dwelling. We see an embodiment, but from the other side it's just total non-dwelling. That's Tathagata. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, it is generally not translated because there are nuances in these words that it's like Dharma is not translated because it's a word that has complicated, culturally embedded and very nuanced meanings, so it doesn't do it justice to translate it. Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is often used the same way. It means supreme, the literal translation is something like supreme perfect enlightenment. And you will see in here in a couple of places that those phrases do show up. And so it has in a couple of places been translated in that way. Dick?
I'm not very clear about what you meant by the cart is mine, the body is mine, whip the cart is whipping the horse. That's not clear to me.
Okay, so I'm going to pass those and deal with them both separately. So the cart, whip the cart or whip the horse. We generally intellectualize, I say we, so let me start that sentence again because I'm very much projecting there. There is a cultural tendency to be intellectual, to bring a lot of things to thinking in our heads, to have philosophical constructs, to describe the world and to look at it in this objective scientific perspective. And objective meaning we put something on the table and we can describe it and we both agree on what we're looking at, right? So there's this very objective worldview. And that's established in our minds, what we think of as our minds. But the most important place to land our teaching is actually in our body. A lot of the teaching is about letting the mind come to stillness so there aren't thoughts emerging, so we don't have ideas of what things are. We just let the body do this. If you pay close attention, if you settle into some kind of mental stillness, some kind of meditative state, and you go for a walk and pay close attention, what you will find is your body is doing the walking. Your body knows exactly what it's doing. It doesn't need your mind to interfere at all. And if you notice, every now and again, your mind tries to interfere and tries to make the body go faster or slower or change direction. The body doesn't need that. It knows how to get home. If you just leave the mind alone and let the body get on with it, the body will do it. Every now and again, something complicated happens, and the body will look to the mind and say, help. It will engage the mind. There'll be a decision like, there's a big puddle. It's rained the last few days, so there's a big puddle. How do we navigate this? And the mind will engage and it will redirect. It'll offer the body its thoughts, and the body will say, thank you. And then the body will, you can leave the body to do it once you've given it that information. So there's a very intentional dropping down into the body. When we engage in the jhana practice, a lot of jhana practice is about dropping down into the body. And the chanting practice that we just engaged in, that also helps drop us down into the body, and it makes the body practice, makes our practice a much more embodied practice. So the story of whip the horse or whip the cart is pushing us to make towards a body-centered practice, rather than thinking the body is just a transport vehicle to move our mind from one meditation hall to another. So that's that one. And then I'll do the other one, so you've got them both as separate ones. So then,
okay, let me just ask, distinguish between doing that and as we're dropping into Buddha nature.
okay, so that's where I'm going next. I'm going to now talk about the body as mind, because that's the second question. These are different questions. The first one is about in time and space, right? Now, in time and space, we've got the mind and the body, and we tend to use them differently. And this is about dropping into body practice. But the reality is, there are no time or space as absolute things. Those are mental constructs. Those are constructs within which, respectively, we create events and we create things. Until we create events and we create things, there's no need for time and space. They don't exist in that kind of way. They co-arise as events arise and as things arise. And those arise as perceptions in our minds. If you go back to when you read people, so this is in the Tibetan texts, there's the dark, and then there's the bright dark. There's the dark light that shines, and it shines like through a pinprick, and the whole universe comes into being. Nisargadatta talks about it the same way. And the idea of a pinprick does it an injustice, because it makes us think of it in terms of the Big Bang, but it is before time and space, so we don't have a spatial or a temporal reference for this. All we can say is that there's a collapse. There's sort of it almost doesn't make sense to talk about it without time and space involved, but that's the only way I can think of to do it. There's kind of this gently fluctuating sea that doesn't have any form, doesn't have any color, doesn't have any texture, but there's awareness in there. And there's a way of those fluctuations giving some level of intensity to awareness, some kind of intention to awareness, some kind of some more active mind emerges out of awareness, and that itself is what creates form. It co-arises with form. It sounds deeply mystical. It is deeply mystical, but this is the way it works. So there's this co-arising. So in that sense, we talk about this being, I've got my awareness, but there's all these people sitting around, and I can think what I like, but all these people have their own realities. Well, we are all emergent from this in what we talk of as the collective consciousness. The collective consciousness is how this mind manifests. So what I think of as me with my mind is just this little pimple that's arising out of this really deep mind. And this deep mind, it's like your dream. It's analogous to your dream. Your dream is mind, little m mind. And yet in your dream there's people running around and they're throwing things, right? And this is that same, we're all actors in this big dream, and we actually are that mind. We're just so caught up in this little story we're telling ourselves, that it's this little mind. Is that remotely helpful, Dick? That's very airy-fairy, it feels, but that's...
Yeah, I have a problem when you keep putting body in. Okay. What you just explained didn't necessarily have to have the body in it.
No,
which made it clear to me anyway.
Okay, and here, thank you. So here's what we then do. So if that first piece, if the first piece is clear, or as clear as it can be, then what happens is, as this world collapses out of that and becomes a physical world, then within that story, we start getting stuck on this little mind, this little M mind. So, for purely expedient purposes, it is, and in order to help us move from getting stuck in these stories back to something that is more deeply connected with Big M mind, back to something that can help us in that move back to connecting in that way, we intentionally move down into the body. And it's through the body. The body isn't anything wonderful in and of itself. The body is just a much easier gateway through which to get back to that original self.
So are you saying, for example, that mindfulness of breathing, which is in a sense dropping down to the body,
Yes.
is a gateway?
Yes. And that's why in the Satipatthana, Buddha talks of mindfulness of the body in the body. The emphasis being on, it's not thinking about your breathing, it's the breathing is thinking about, the body's thinking about the breathing, right? That's why there's that emphasis. Anyone else?
I have a question if nobody has.
Go ahead, Natalie.
So here it says, initiate the mind of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. So initiate the mind of perfect enlightenment. How come enlightenment has a mind? And number two, how do you initiate a mind? I understand what it means to create a self, but what does it mean to initiate a mind?
Yeah. I need to sit really past the words. You're right, it's tricky. The core of this, though, is we, everybody on the screen, everybody in this room, we are having this conversation in time and space. Because we are experiencing ourselves as human beings, which are both things and events. We are experiencing time and space. We've brought a reality together that is time and space. Within that, things do get initiated. Everything has to have a start. Within that there is a beginning, there's a sustaining, and there's an ending. And there's a practice, which is with your thoughts. You observe the arising, the abiding, the changing, and the cessation. So the mind of Anuttara Sambodhi is, to the extent it arises, to the extent it comes forth, it arises within this. But supreme perfect enlightenment, you are quite right, is just things as it is. It's just suchness. It's to have none of this. So it's a linguistic way of describing that bridge to get from this experience of reality to not dwelling, which is moving into that realm of reality, which I just talked about with Dick. So initiate is kind of a clunky way of getting that bridge set up, and as I said, I'd have to pass it more to
So
figure
are
it
you
out.
saying that this actually could be translated as, how the experience of perfect enlightenment arises in them?
But experience is also within time.
It's also right, but
The experience
it's
is there's
much
an
more
experience.
understandable than the mind of enlightenment.
That we then get, it may be to you, Natalie, but maybe not to other people. We come across this lots of different times. The word shunyata, most commonly translated as emptiness. There are people who struggle with emptiness, and they prefer hearing the word boundless. Translation, schmranslation, doesn't matter to me, but I see there are real challenges with the use of boundless as well. So all of these translations, and try translating Dharma, and you're in a mess. You can't translate Dharma. So what we're doing here is we're using a linguistic construct that was developed, and it was actually developed by Kumarajiva, who was Chinese. This was originally in Sanskrit, and it was translated to Chinese. This commentary is on the Chinese text, and the Chinese text that comes down to his Kumarajiv was apparently just an absolutely linguistic master, and he did an unbelievable job. Chinese is a language that lends itself to this as well. He did an unbelievable job of being able to capture these indescribable and incomprehensible matters in language.
But he doesn't explain word for word.
No.
Like gives word for word for the Chinese. And
Well, that's what I'm getting at. You can't do word for the Chinese, because the words do not. I mean, you speak Arabic. I mean, the Quran, a lot, as I understand it, much of the Quran, there's intentional gender confusion, case confusion. There's lots of linguistic tricks done within the text of the Quran that throw confusion, that work in a particular way in Arabic. You can't translate that, and that's why you don't get translations of the Quran. You get commentaries on the Quran, right? And so we've got the same thing going on here. It doesn't translate. And what you're trying to do is use language to get to something that cannot be expressed in language. So you're just bumping up against one of those limitations.
But knowing the original word or the original phrase of a bunch of words, and then comment on how each of these words is used in the original language is going to be helpful to actually cut through that translation.
Yeah. Well, I cut through it by avoiding that particular piece, approaching it in a different way. So, but you're picking up on the fundamental problems of language, basically. That's what I'm hearing.
So he wrote it in English or in Chinese?
No.
And that was
So
translated?
what happened? The
commentary.
sutra that he is teaching. He's Chinese. He's native Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
He was teaching to a Chinese community.
So the book was originally written in Chinese?
Correct. The teachings were originally in Chinese, and they were written down by one of his students, and then his student translated it. If you read the preamble to the book, she is very apologetic for her efforts to translate it into English, because she knows so much both of the content and of the nuance of the voice of the master is lost in the translation. Yeah. So all we're doing is pointing. All we're doing is pointing and trying to get beyond the words to how this feels. We are now a couple of minutes past our appointed time, folks. If anybody has something that's really pressing, please do say it. I will pause. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your chanting. Thank you for your questions and conversation. Hope to see you all soon, and hope you'll come back next month. Have a great rest of the weekend.